everyone, it's Tricia McCannon, and thank you so much for joining us for this amazing next hour on angels. One of the reasons that I'm talking to you is because I actually happen to have an amazing group of speakers and writers and teachers who've contributed to my new book and their new book. And you can see it here. It's called Angels. It's by SacredStories Publishing Company. And you can see a lot of their names right here on the cover. And that's because each one of them has written an incredible story of their own experiences. And like many of you in the audience, you may have had your own experience with angels as well. And today you're going to get an opportunity to hear some just little narrow slices of some of the extraordinary stories in this book from some of the amazing leading teachers and voices that we have that are coming forth in our world to try to bring the enlightenment down into the physical world. So we might ask, if you're curious about angels, what angels are. And I guess, you know, we know about them traditionally through almost every religion of the world, not just Judaism and Christianity and the Quran, but also actually the Japanese, the Chinese, the Persians, the Indians, the Native Americans, the Celts, really the Norse people, they call them Valkyries. All of them actually have stories, amazing stories of these winged figures that appear and disappear, sometimes with wings, sometimes looking completely human, but truly seeming to arrive in moments of great crisis. And sometimes they arrive at a time where the human people, that's us, actually put out a cry of desperation or a life-changing incident or a time of such deep crisis that we invite them in. And that's one of the important things to know about angels, is that they're very honoring of our free will and of our space. And so they want to be invited in so that they can work as partners with us. What are the angels? Well, aside from all the many historic stories, many of which I talk about in this book, including famous encounters that George Washington had, St. Francis of Assisi, Joan of Arc, an FBI agent literally at the time of 9/11, Russian cosmonauts that were all atheists who literally saw gigantic angels that were the size of a 747 up in from a space station in outer space, gigantic. Aside from this, my experience of them, which has started when I was about 8 years old, is that they are really the agents or the messengers of the divine, of God. They are multidimensional in nature. They vibrate at a higher frequency than we do. So most of the time we don't see them, even though they're very present. There are ones that are personal angels, like guardian angels. There are also angels that oversee holy sites, cities, countries, mountains. They would be the high end of the elemental or the devic kingdom, because they are very, very conscious and they are directly connected to the divine. And consequently, they're not egoically based like we humans are. They're not as complex with their mental bodies or their emotional bodies. They are able to be in direct knowing and direct transmission through the power of love and the power of their connection to the divine source of all things. So we are going to hear some stories, short versions of the stories today from some of our amazing authors.
Yes, this happened when I was just a newborn, actually. And my sister had an appendicitis, and it wasn't diagnosed correctly by the doctor. And so they end up eventually getting an emergency surgery. And my mother realizes one day that she's losing her. And that night, under strict orders from the doctor, like no foods and things like that, this nurse came in that my mother had never seen. And of course, she'd been there for days. And my sister was all pink with infection, and all her curls were, you know, just pressed to her head. She was passing away. And so that nurse came in, and my mother had never seen her before, and she spoke to her a minute and made her feel very different. And she offered her a candy bar, asked if she could give a candy bar. My mother says it makes no rhyme or reason, but she said yes. And then my sister ate it, and she never saw her again. The nurse didn't do any of the normal things. She didn't take vital signs. She didn't write in the charts. My mother just says she just recalled this, yes, being in agreement with her. And just to we've lived in this town, like all of my life pretty much, and all of her life for sure. She never saw her again, so, and it was a time when you knew everybody's nurse and stuff. So, as what that story meant for me growing up is that I realized that there was a spiritual side of life, and I didn't know why some people were saved and some people weren't, but I know we were very touched, and I cannot possibly imagine my own life without my sister. So we're very, very grateful.
Kim, I love that story. And I remember in the way you wrote it, you talked about how this nurse came in sort of in the dead of night when almost nobody was there. So it wasn't like during the day. And it was just like this miraculous appearance. And of course, they took a very human form, which is one of the things, too, I think about. There are different ways that angels communicate with us. And sometimes we don't see them, we only hear them. And in fact, AZANDE has a wonderful life and death story about literally being awoken through that clairaudience. So AZANDE, do you mind sharing a little of your amazing story?
I'd be honored. Thank you, Tricia. So mine started just one day I went to the spa and I had my two loving, I call them niecey daughters that I was raising. I brought them and I wanted them to have a little girl facial, and it was a body wrap. And I remember they just slathered me with all these oils, and then they wrapped me in saran wrap like a fish. And then they put me in this tunnel and I couldn't get in. She had to help me in. And everything was closed except like a little bit of my face was out. And I just felt like it was the first time I had relaxed in months. So I was just so happy to just have some relaxation. And then I drifted off to, I don't know, sleep, but then the most peaceful peace came completely over me and just enveloped me. And then I saw Archangel Michael. I hadn't never been like into angels or studying angels. Of course I knew about angels, but it wasn't something, I was thinking about. And here this angel was, and he said he was there to guide and protect me. And I've never felt so much love in my life, so much peace. And so long story short, I think he knew what was happening. I was pretty much dying because the lady forgot me in the tube. And when my eyes opened, it said like 171 degrees. And I remember trying to figure out, is that more or less than my body temperature? I was so out of it. But I'll never forget that experience. I had friends tell me, oh, you should sue them. They almost killed you. And I said, why? It was the most beautiful experience of my life.
I'd love also to hear from Dee. Dee has an incredible story about, if I remember, 5 golden light beings. Where's Dee?
Yes,
can you unmute yourself?
I'm here.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes. Thank you for having me here. This is wonderful. Yes. Yes, it happened. When I was 40 years old, I found out I was sick with an aneurysm, my aorta.
An aneurysm, right?
But only aorta. I had a defective valve, aortic valve, and aneurysm. So 4.5 centimeters large.
On your heart.
Yes, in aorta. Yes. Unfortunately, I found out I was born with a defective valve, but for some reason, never. I never had any health issues until 40 years old. So I'm from Brazil. I'm living here. It's been about 18 years. So when I found out I was sick, I decided to go back to my home country to have surgery, to be with family, right? So my mother's idea was, oh, I want to visit Mount Shasta, California for a last time. We can do a hike. It's a very spiritual place. Archangel Michael, she's very into it, and Saint Germain, all the beings of light.
Masters, those amazing
Yes.
masters that are
Yes.
associated with that holy site. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we went to this trip for a week, and I can tell that the trip for me was my reborn, you know, my second chance to be here and be able to write the story. While we were hiking Mount Shasta, just the base of the mountain, because we were not doing like a high altitude, was, but not that much, like a acceptable height. So we, during the whole day, I felt the energy of the beings of light. We had prayers in the mountain, and I felt surrounded by this tall beings of light. And always I could see that black suitcase. I always say it's a black, looks like a doctor case. One of them had those. And I always have this, I can hear, I see, sometimes when it's allowed me to see, but they never show their faces. It's just that silhouette, you know, but they were tall. And from the Mount Shasta side, we kept doing our hike. We went to Castle Lake. It's kind of closed on the way. That time of the year, April, the lake is frozen. And then we can see Mount Shasta on the back. It's beautiful. So when we were there, walking, doing the prayer, I had an aortic dissection right on the middle of the lake, on nowhere. So again, I felt surrounded by the beings of light. And the whole time, I'm a believer, I survived it because I had their medical help, their spiritual help, because it was about 6 hours until I could be rescued from the mountain to a hospital which could do open heart surgery, an emergency. Mount Shasta, California is a very small city, would not be able to save me. The hospital could find Sacramento in California. So I was flown by helicopter. So I had a whole about 6 hours to be able to have the open heart surgery. And every step of the way, you know, doctors that have that vision, you're not surviving, you're gonna die. They make me do my final calls, you know, and same thing in Sacramento. They were not expecting me to arrive alive. So I was alive, I was stable the whole time, you know, and on the operating table, the same thing. I could talk to the doctor discussing. I remember clear, like no wanting to put a metal valve. The whole, it was crazy. I remember everything, leaving my body during surgery, seeing the bright light and going. I had a very nice experience.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be part of this book. And before I share about the story itself, I just want to say, based upon the things that I've been receiving from the angels, just even this year, the coming forth of this book is very timely. I mean, this book just happens to be coming out synchronistically at a time when the angels are revealing themselves to humanity more than ever before. There's a process of angelic integration that's ramping up. And it's very powerful for people to connect with these kinds of stories and to realize that anybody can choose to invoke this kind of sacred contact. The story that I contributed is a really interesting one to share, and I'm glad that I had this particular platform to share it on, because it's one that I had not shared anywhere else. It's not one that I had planned on including in any other book. And it's unique because it was an experience of a seamless transition from being awake, conscious in my body, to being in the angelic realms. I was actually in an out-of-body state, but I've never had an experience like this where it was a seamless transition. I laid down, the room filled up with this glowing mist. The lights were off, but there was kind of an ambient glow. And I just started to breathe it in, and I felt more and more relaxed and at peace. And then I was just lifted. Now I was being lifted out of my body, but it didn't seem like that while it was happening. It felt like I was being lifted up off the bed until I was physically in the angelic realms, looking around and floating there,
Wow.
seeing all of these clouds of color and light. And this group of angels kind of rode in on a glowing golden white cloud of light into this mist and started to communicate with me and introduce themselves as the angels of peace.
Oh, wow. That doesn't happen every day.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had an experience quite like it. And I mean, I've had a lot of angelic encounters, but this one was really, really unique in this regard.
Now, speaking of that, Linda Vargos, I would love for her to tell us a little bit about her story, because she was only 6 years old when this happened for her. Linda, do you mind unmuting yourself, sweetie?
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. My family had we had moved to the country to a big house the year before this happened, and it was one of those houses where there's between the first and second floor there's 2 sets of stairs and what you call a landing or a stairwell in the middle, with a window over on that wall, and underneath it was an big old iron radiator. And that morning, you know, a rambunctious, I think by that time I might have been close to 7, a rambunctious 7-year-old, I was running on the second floor to go downstairs, and my toe tripped on the carpeting, and I started to fly headfirst down toward the landing. And I could feel myself almost like I was flying in space. Like I knew I was going headfirst. I could feel the rest of my body behind me. And you know, all this stuff happens so quickly within seconds. It's amazing. But I became aware that I was headed toward the iron radiator, and my head was first. And I just had an instant of knowing that I was going to die. And this, like, all I could say was like this dripping energy of like sadness poured into me very quickly. And when that happened, immediately someone's hands came around my rib cage and grabbed me out of the air and sat me straight down. And you know, when you trip or you have a fall, you have whiplash, right? But there was none of that. I was sat straight down. My feet were right in front of me on the step below. And immediately I just felt this love pouring through the top of me, because I was feeling so grateful that someone caught me, and it just filled me up. I didn't realize till later the symbolism of that coming in through my crown and through my body, this love. And then I thought, oh, well, who caught me? You know, and I turned to see who that was and realized that there was no one there. But I could still, the hands were starting to disappear at that point. I mean, they felt like big, slender fingers, big hands, you know, but around my rib cage. And the moment I started to realize there was no one there, they started to just disappear. And then I sat for a minute and went, you know, like, what was that? Who was that? Right. And I became fearful. And when I got scared, that came from my core up, and it pushed up, and when it pushed up, it pushed out all the good feeling. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized that you can't, that was a lesson, and you can't hold both those energies. You're either in love and trust, or you're in fear. You know, we have to make a choice, right? But in any case, that's an aside. It's just that was a later on thing that I realized.
We have a lot of wonderful other stories. And Mary, if you would not share about what happened to you with the coma and high school and all that. Is Mary on?
Yep, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there she is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm always pleased to have the opportunity to share this story, because, well, it's my experience. It's not just about me. It's about all of us and all of our capabilities, and a bigger understanding of the world around us. Yeah, my story started years ago when I was in college, and I was returning to my dorm, crossing the street at a crosswalk, and was hit by a car that ran a red light. And it was disastrous. My parents were called to charter a plane out because I was not going to last the night. I had multiple skull fractures. I had a blow-up fracture of the eye. I had a fracture of the neck. I had a punctured lung and was not going to survive. I was there in the hospital and I was aware of everything going on around me. I was not in my body. I was looking down and aware of everything around me. And I was also aware I had a choice and that I could stay or I could go. And both choices were lovely. And I spent all this time experiencing both realms, the good of both realms. And then I was aware of my father there next to my body, intensely praying, intensely wanting me to live, praying so intensely and unendingly. And as I tuned my attention to him, I made my decision like that. I was coming back. And the minute I made my decision, I felt this huge force line up behind me. Like, you know, the term, I've got your back. It was like the whole universe had my back. And I was coming back into the world. I was coming back fully. There was no question. And there was force of the universe, the divine essence lined up behind me.
We have two other amazing speakers we want to hear from. And speaking of life and death situations, Amy's story is also extraordinary and life-changing. And then we're going to end with the fabulous, famous Bernie Siegel. We're sort of saving the best for last. So Amy, would you please share your story?
Sure, yes. About 30 years ago, at the age of 22, I was married for about 10 months to my new husband. And on New Year's Day, he had a heart attack and, he died. And I'm sorry, I still get choked up. But
1 year, only 1 year married. Oh my
Yeah.
God, girl.
yeah. But anyways, when we went to the hospital that night, I just prayed on the way there and I said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I need help, So I'm sorry. When I got to the hospital, it was really hard because my family wasn't with me and I was by myself. And I just remember like being so sad and saying, I just need help. So I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, there was this lady in the hallway and I'd never seen her. And she came up to me and she gave me a hug and she said, I just remember hearing God is with you and you'll make it through this. And I had this overwhelming peace come over me. And I knew like, you're going to be strong, you're going to make it. And I just knew everything's going to be fine that night. And ever since then, that was like a defining moment in my life. And, ever since then, I've had angels visit me, numerous times. I'm very
You're
blessed.
gonna have to write a whole book, another
Yeah,
one. Bernie, darling, you are our guy. We have waited, masculine anchor there. And Bernie, as many of you know, is a doctor, a writer, a speaker, a teacher extraordinaire. And he wrote with great humor and joy about how his meeting his guide changed his life. So Bernie, would you mind sharing that with our audience?
It all started at age 3.5. There were men working in our house, putting nails in their mouths, and going like that. And I decided to imitate them playing on my bed. So I took a toy apart, put it in my mouth and aspirated it. And then I was choking to death. One of the most painful experiences I've ever had in my life, because every muscle is sucking and nothing's happening. And then suddenly, well, I left my body. So I thought,
Bernie, is aspirated, does that mean choking to death for those of us who aren't doctors?
they go down, go into your trachea, your larynx, your voice box goes into spasm to keep it from going into your lungs, but no air can go in at the same time. So
and it's a nail was in your trachea?
it wasn't a nail, it was a piece of a toy telephone I took apart to imitate these guys working in the house because I put the pieces in my mouth.
Oh
See?
my gosh.
And then there I am, unable to breathe, excruciating pain. And suddenly, oh, I'm okay. I stopped hurting. And I thought, well, I must be okay. Then I realized, no, dumbbell, you're dead. You're not in your body anymore. I don't know how to describe it. It's like I'm up at the ceiling looking down. And I always say at the kid on the bed or the body on the bed, it wasn't me anymore. I never said myself. I looked at myself on the bed. It was the body, the kid, whatever. And I noticed the body lifted up. And I thought, oh, having a seizure. But later, as I developed medical information, I knew it was a Heimlich maneuver because the middle of the body was lifted up and the pieces came flying out. And I could breathe again, which annoyed me a lot because I said, oh, I don't mind being dead. This is wonderful. I can see, I can think. I don't want to go back. I know my mother will be upset, but I prefer being dead. And then suddenly I'm breathing and boom, I'm back in my body. And years later, I realized, and that's when we get into the angel, that your angel did that. And when I said to him, George, I realized you did it. He said, yeah, you weren't supposed to be dead at age 3. So I did that. And I can tell you that George has saved my life innumerable times.
To encourage our audience to read the book, to open to invite your own angels in, and to be aware that you are surrounded by celestial forces that see you, love you, acknowledge you, and care for you. And to pay attention to your contract, because each of us come in with a great contract in the world.